He burned the letter. Benjamin Franklin stood alone beside the fireplace holding pages he had spent 3 nights writing. Words meant for his son. Words full of pain, of doubt, of a father's deepest shame. He held the flame close, and then he let it go. Not because he didn't love his son, but because he understood something that took him a lifetime to learn. Some things once spoken inside a family can never be unspoken. That moment changed everything about how Franklin lived, how he led, and how he protected the people he loved most. And the lesson he carried from that fireplace, few people ever stop long enough to hear. This is just as dangerous and just as necessary today as it was in 1776. You think honesty with family means telling them everything. You think openness is the same as love. You think keeping something to yourself is a form of betrayal. Franklin believed the opposite, and he paid a price, a real and heartbreaking price, to learn why. Let's go back to the beginning. Benjamin Franklin was not born wise. He was born poor, loud, and full of fire. The 15th child of a candle maker, a boy who left school at 10 years old because his family could not afford to keep him there. He taught himself to read. He taught himself to write. He stayed up past midnight with borrowed books copying sentences by candlelight until his fingers ached. He became one of the most admired men in history, a scientist, a diplomat, a founder of a nation, a man whose face would one day appear on the currency of a country that did not yet exist when he was born. But inside his home, inside his family, Franklin knew failure in a way that his public life never showed. His son William chose the wrong side of the Revolutionary War. Not a small mistake, not a quiet disagreement. William remained loyal to the British crown while his father helped tear that crown apart. The two men never fully reconciled. A father and a son separated not by distance, but by pride, by silence, and by things that were said at the wrong moment in the wrong way. Franklin spent years asking himself one question, not about politics, not about war. He asked himself, what did I share that I should have kept? Here is what most people misunderstand about Benjamin Franklin. They see the kite in the lightning storm. They see the diplomat charming the French court. They see the witty author of Poor Richard's Almanac full of sharp sayings and confident wisdom. They do not see the man sitting alone quiet carrying the weight of private failures he refused to speak aloud, because Franklin understood something deep about human nature. Something that takes most people their entire life to discover. Something that, and please listen carefully to this, still destroys families today in living rooms and at dinner tables, in text messages sent at midnight, and in arguments that never really end. There are 3 things you must never share with your family, not because your family doesn't love you, but because love is not enough to protect you from what happens when certain truths land in the wrong hands, even loving hands. Your family sees you every day. They know your face. They know the sound of your voice when something is wrong. They know which memories make you flinch. And precisely because they know you so well, they hold a power over you that no stranger, no enemy, no rival ever could. A stranger cannot use your weakness against you. Your family can. Not always with cruelty, sometimes with kindness, sometimes without even knowing they are doing it. Franklin wrote about the danger of misplaced confession, not in dramatic terms, not as a warning on a wall. He wrote it quietly, tucked inside letters and almanac entries that most people skim past without stopping. He wrote, a wise man keeps 3 things hidden from his family: his weaknesses, his anguish, and his infatuations. 3 things. And when you hear them listed like that, your first reaction might be to push back. You might think, but shouldn't family be the place where I can be fully myself? Shouldn't the people who love me be the ones I trust with everything? Listen to this very carefully. That instinct, the desire to be fully known by the people closest to you, is one of the most human desires that exists. It is not wrong. It comes from love. It comes from loneliness. It comes from the deep ache of moving through the world behind a mask and wanting just once to take it off completely. But Franklin is not asking you to be dishonest with your family. He is asking you to be wise about what you hand them. Because there is a difference between honesty and exposure. There is a difference between being real and being reckless. There is a difference between sharing your life with someone and handing them the exact tools they would need, even accidentally, to diminish you. Think about the last time you told someone close to you about a fear you carried, a deep one, the kind that lives in your chest at 3 in the morning when the rest of the world is asleep. Maybe they held it gently for a while, but then perhaps months later, perhaps years, that same fear came back to you. Not from inside yourself. From them. In an argument. In a moment of frustration. In a comment meant to be helpful that landed like a blade. They did not mean to wound you. They were using the only map of you they had. The map you gave them. Franklin knew this. He lived this. And what he learned from the fire of his own mistakes was not to trust less. It was to love with more precision. And here is something very few people ever realize. The most protective thing you can do for a relationship is not to pour everything into it. It is to know what belongs inside and what belongs to you alone. There is a moment Franklin once described when a man faces the hardest version of his own life. Not the public version, the private one. The one where he must decide whether to speak or be silent, whether to carry the weight alone or hand it to someone else. Most men, he said, hand it over too quickly, and then they spend the rest of their lives trying to take it back. His own father taught him about silence, not through a lecture, not through advice, through watching. The old candle maker in Boston, working long hours carrying the worry of feeding 17 children, never once letting that weight collapse onto the family dinner table. He kept what was heavy inside himself. He kept what was uncertain away from the children who could do nothing to change it. Young Benjamin watched that. He stored it. He didn't understand it until much later. Until the letter. Until the fire. Until the son who chose the other side and never came back. And then only then he understood the full cost of sharing the wrong thing with the wrong person, no matter how much you love them. Here is what Franklin never told anyone until it was almost too late. The 3 things he said a wise man hides from his family. They are not secrets kept out of shame. They are the last things standing between who you are and who the world will allow you to become. And the most dangerous person you will ever share them with is not an enemy, not a stranger, not a rival at work or a critic in public. It is someone sitting at the same table as you tonight. Before we go deeper, tell me, where in the world are you watching this right now? Drop your city in the comments below. It always moves me to see how far these ideas travel. And if this is the first time we have met here, please subscribe. What comes next in this story will change the way you see every conversation you have with the people closest to you. Because Franklin's 3 warnings go much deeper than most people expect. And the third one, the one about infatuation, is the one that has quietly ended more lives than the other 2 combined. So let's talk about the first thing. The first thing Franklin said a wise man never shares with his family. His weakness. Not weakness in the general sense. Not the kind of weakness you joke about at dinner. Not, I can't resist chocolate, or I always stay up too late. Franklin was talking about the real kind. The kind that lives underneath everything. The kind that if the wrong person found it could be used to move you like a piece on a chessboard. And here is where the story gets difficult. Because Franklin was not speaking in theory. He was speaking from a wound. The year was 1757. Franklin had been sent to London as a representative of the Pennsylvania Assembly. He was 51 years old, far from home, living in a rented room on Craven Street, while his wife Deborah remained in Philadelphia. She refused to cross the ocean. She was afraid of ships. So Franklin went alone. And in London, he began to struggle. Not publicly. Never publicly. Franklin had built his entire reputation on the image of a man who was steady, resourceful, unshakable. The man who pulled lightning from the sky and turned it into a scientific principle. The man who walked into rooms full of powerful people and made them feel like they needed him more than he needed them. But in private, in the letters he never sent, and the journal entries that were only discovered long after his death, Franklin wrote about something he almost never spoke aloud. He wrote about doubt. Deep, corrosive, suffocating doubt. About whether he was truly capable of the task ahead of him. About whether the people of Pennsylvania had placed their trust in the wrong man. About whether all of his confidence, all of those years of projecting certainty, had simply been a mask so well fitted that even he had forgotten what was underneath it. He wrote, "I have often been ashamed of my own ignorance, when the moment demanded wisdom I did not possess." Read that again slowly. This is Benjamin Franklin, the man on the $100 bill, writing in private about shame, about ignorance, about the gap between who the world believed him to be and who he actually felt like at 3 in the morning in a cold room in London. And then he did something that almost cost him everything. He told someone. He told his sister Jane. Jane Franklin Mecum was the youngest of Benjamin's siblings, the one he was closest to, the one he wrote to more than anyone else across his entire life. Their correspondence spans decades. It is one of the most beautiful records of sibling love in American history. And Jane loved him completely, without question, without condition, which is exactly why what happened next was so dangerous. She wrote back with comfort, with reassurance, with all the love a sister could pour into a letter. She told him he was the finest mind she had ever known. She told him the people of Pennsylvania were lucky to have him. She told him his doubts were simply the mark of a good man who took his responsibilities seriously. Every word she wrote was true, and every word made him weaker. Do you recognize this? Have you ever told someone close to you about a fear and their love for you made the fear feel more real, not less? Because that is exactly what happened. Franklin noticed something shift inside him after that letter. When Jane confirmed his doubt by rushing to soothe it, the doubt grew roots. It became something he needed to be protected from, rather than something he could simply walk through. And every time he felt it rising again, instead of pushing forward through it alone, he now associated it with the need for comfort. With needing someone else to tell him he was going to be all right. He had handed his sister a piece of his foundation without meaning to. And she had accepted it with love. And now she held it. This is what they never teach you in school. Strength is not something you can share and still keep whole. It is not like warmth where two people standing close to a fire both get warmer. Strength works differently. When you hand your weakness to someone who loves you, they do not absorb it. They carry it for you. And carrying it for you means you stop carrying it yourself. And the moment you stop carrying your own weight is the moment you forget you were ever strong enough to carry it. Franklin understood this the hard way. He returned from London with his public reputation intact. The diplomatic mission was not a complete failure, but something inside him had changed. He had tasted the relief of being seen in his uncertainty by someone who loved him, and that taste had become a habit. Over the following years, he caught himself doing it again, sharing small doubts with Deborah, letting William see a moment of hesitation before a major decision, allowing people close to him to witness cracks that he had always before that winter in London kept sealed. Each time felt like honesty. Each time felt like closeness. Each time felt like love. And each time without fully understanding why he felt slightly smaller afterward. Not because the people he shared with were unkind, not because they used what he gave them against him, but because the act of sharing weakness with someone who loves you creates a permanent map. They now know where you are softest. And even if they never press that spot deliberately, you know they know. And that knowledge changes how you stand in front of them. You stand slightly differently, slightly less straight. Franklin wrote about this in a letter to a young man seeking his advice on marriage and friendship. He wrote, and I want you to hear this carefully. The man who lets his family see every crack in his armor does not earn their deeper love. He earns their deeper worry. And a family consumed by worry for you cannot stand beside you. They can only stand in front of you. Stand in front of you, not behind you, not beside you, in front of you, between you and the world, protecting you from the very challenges that would make you stronger if you faced them yourself. Now, here is where the tension in Franklin's life reached its first breaking point. Because there came a moment when his weakness, the one he had shared in pieces across letters and quiet conversations, was used against him. Not by an enemy, by his own son. William Franklin had grown up watching his father, studying him, learning the shape of every room Benjamin walked into and exactly how his father moved through it. He had seen his father at his most powerful, and because of those letters and those quiet moments of shared doubt, he had also seen him at his least certain. And when the revolution came, when the choice between loyalty to the crown and loyalty to the new nation had to be made, William used what he knew. He did not attack his father publicly. He did not expose him. He simply looked at him across a table in 1775 and said with the calm of a man who knows exactly where to press, "Father, you are not certain this will succeed. I have heard it in your voice for years." Franklin could not answer, because William was right. And the only reason William had that weapon was because Franklin had handed it to him piece by piece across 20 years of being a father who believed that honesty with the people you love most is always a virtue. That silence between them lasted longer than the war. Do you see what is happening here? This is not a story about keeping secrets. This is not Franklin telling you to become cold or closed or unreachable. This is something far more precise and far more important. This is about understanding that the people who love you are not always equipped to hold what you give them. Not because they are weak, but because love and wisdom are not the same thing. Your family loves you with everything they have, but love does not automatically come with the knowledge of what to do with your most fragile pieces. And when those pieces land in the wrong hands, even the most loving hands, they do not shatter all at once. They erode, slowly, the way water shapes stone. You do not notice it happening until one day you reach for the strength you used to have and you find something softer in its place. Franklin noticed, and it almost broke him. But what saved him was the second warning. The second thing he said a wise man must never share with his family: his anguish. And this one is darker than the first, because the first warning is about strength, about what you risk when you let people see where you are weak. But the second warning is about something deeper, something that lives beneath weakness, something that once released inside a family spreads like a slow fire through every room of a house and is almost impossible to put out. But what Franklin discovered about anguish and what it cost his family before he understood it is the part of his story that almost no one talks about. And you need to hear it before we go any further. Anguish is not sadness. Understand that before we go further. Sadness is something you feel and move through. Anguish is something that takes up residence inside you and refuses to leave. Sadness softens with time. Anguish calcifies. It becomes part of your structure, part of the way you hold yourself when you walk into a room. And Franklin knew anguish, deeply, personally, in a way that the history books have almost entirely erased. Because here is what most people do not know about Benjamin Franklin. Before he was a statesman, before he was a scientist, before he was the man who charmed Paris and helped build a nation, he was a father who lost a child, his son Francis, 4 years old, dead from smallpox in 1736. Franklin never fully recovered. He spoke about it rarely. He wrote about it even less. But in the silence around that loss in the years that followed, people who were close to him noticed something. A weight that never fully lifted. A shadow that crossed his face in unguarded moments. A grief that had gone underground and become something harder and darker than grief. It had become anguish. And here is where Franklin made the second great mistake of his private life. He brought it home, not loudly, not in collapse. Franklin was never the kind of man to collapse publicly or privately. He brought it home the way most people bring their anguish home. Quietly, in the silences between sentences, in the way he sometimes stopped speaking mid-thought and looked at nothing for a moment too long. In the slight withdrawal that his wife Deborah noticed but never named because naming it felt more dangerous than leaving it alone. The anguish moved through the house like weather. Deborah felt it. William felt it. Everyone who lived inside those walls felt it without being told what it was. And because it was never named, because Franklin believed he was protecting his family by keeping the full weight of it to himself, they began to fill the silence with their own explanations. Deborah decided she had done something wrong. William decided his father was disappointed in him. And the anguish that belonged to Franklin alone, the grief of a father who had buried a 4-year-old son and never let himself fully mourn, became everyone's problem. Silently, invisibly, without a single word being spoken about it. Franklin wrote years later in a letter that was found among his private papers after his death. "I thought that by carrying my grief alone, I was sparing my family its weight. I did not understand that grief carried silently in a shared home is not carried alone. It is simply carried without a name." Read that slowly. Grief carried silently in a shared home is not carried alone. It is simply carried without a name. This is the thing that changes everything about how you understand what Franklin was warning against. He was not saying hide your pain so that no one knows you suffer. He was not saying be a stone, be unreachable, feel nothing and show nothing. He was saying something far more specific, far more surgical. He was saying your anguish, when released into the emotional atmosphere of a family, without context, without shape, without the words that would allow people to understand what they are living with, becomes a force that your family will spend years trying to explain. And in trying to explain it, they will almost always make themselves the answer. They will decide they are the cause. And once a person decides they are the cause of someone else's anguish, everything changes. The relationship changes. The power inside the relationship changes. And the love, which was always real, begins to twist itself into something exhausting and desperate. Now here is where the story breaks open. Here is the twist that Franklin himself did not see coming until it was standing directly in front of him. It was 1775, 1 year before the Declaration of Independence. Franklin had returned from London after nearly 2 decades. He was 69 years old. His wife Deborah had died the year before while he was still abroad. He had not made it back in time. He sat across from William at a table in Philadelphia. William was the royal governor of New Jersey, a position of enormous power and prestige, a position that placed him at that exact moment in history on the opposite side of everything his father had spent his life building. The conversation began quietly. Franklin said, "I need to know where you stand." William said, "I stand where I have always stood, with the law, with order, with the crown." Franklin said, "The crown is ending, William." William said, "You cannot know that." Franklin said, "I know it the way I know when a storm is coming. I have always known it before it arrives." William looked at his father for a long moment, and then he said something that no history book has ever fully captured, something that came not from politics, not from ideology, not from loyalty to the British crown. He said, "You taught me never to follow a man who was not certain of himself. You told me that yourself. In your letters. In your moments of doubt that you shared with me when I was young enough to believe they were lessons and not confessions. And I have watched you, Father, for 50 years. And I have never once seen you certain, not truly. So forgive me if I choose to stand with something that at least claims to know what it is." Franklin had no answer, because William was not wrong. And this is the moment that changes everything. The anguish Franklin had carried silently through his home for decades had not disappeared into the walls. It had been absorbed by his son. And William had interpreted it exactly the way Deborah had, exactly the way Franklin feared. He had made himself the explanation. He had looked at his father's unspoken grief, his unnamed doubt, his carried weight, and he had concluded that he, William, was somehow insufficient. That nothing he did would ever be quite enough to lift whatever darkness lived inside his father. And so William had stopped trying to earn his father's certainty, and had gone looking for certainty somewhere else. In the crown, in the law, in institutions that claimed absolute authority precisely because they never admitted doubt. Franklin had spent 20 years worrying that sharing his weakness would make him smaller in his son's eyes. He never once considered that hiding it would do exactly the same damage, just more slowly, just more completely. This is what they never teach you, not in school, not in books about success or leadership or how to build a powerful life. They tell you to be strong. They tell you to protect your family from your pain. They tell you that a good father, a good mother, A good partner stands between the people they love and the hardest parts of life. But no one tells you what happens inside a home when strength becomes silence, when protection becomes distance, when the people who love you can feel the weight you are carrying, but cannot see its shape, and so they spend years walking carefully around something they cannot name, trying not to disturb it, trying not to be the thing that makes it worse. Franklin wrote in his final years in a passage that has been largely overlooked by historians who preferred his wit to his wounds. The cruelest thing I ever did to the people I loved was to suffer beautifully in front of them. To let them see just enough of my pain to know it existed, but never enough to understand it. I gave them the weather without the map, and they spent their whole lives trying to find shelter from a storm they could not read. The weather without the map. That sentence has lived in my mind since the first time I encountered it. Because you have done this. I have done this. Every person who has ever loved someone and tried to protect them from pain has done this. We let people feel the edges of what we carry. We let the atmosphere of our anguish fill the rooms we share with them. And then we wonder why the distance between us keeps growing even when we are standing in the same house. And now, the third thing. The one Franklin called the most dangerous of all. Infatuation. Not love. Infatuation. There is a difference, and Franklin understood it with a precision that most people never reach. Love is steady. Love makes decisions. Love shows up when it is inconvenient and stays when it is difficult. Love is at its core a practice. Something you do every day whether you feel like it or not. Infatuation is something else entirely. Infatuation is a fire, beautiful while it burns, consuming everything it touches, and completely indifferent to what survives. Franklin was infatuated, more than once, in ways that the polished portrait of founding father mythology has worked very hard to smooth over and explain away. He was infatuated with ideas, with certain women, with the version of himself that existed in the gaze of people who admired him. And he understood through painful experience that infatuation shared inside a family does not bring people closer. It detonates. Because infatuation is not just an emotion. It is a confession of what you want most. And what you want most is the most vulnerable thing about you. More vulnerable than your weakness. More exposing than your anguish. What you want most tells people who you actually are beneath every version of yourself you have ever presented to the world. And when your family knows what you want most, they hold a power over you that is almost impossible to overstate. William knew. He had watched his father across decades. He had seen what made Benjamin Franklin come alive. The conversations that lit him from inside. The ideas that made his hands move when he spoke. The particular quality of attention he gave to certain people in certain rooms. William knew what his father wanted. And in that room in Philadelphia in 1775, when he looked at his father and said what he said, he was using it. Not with cruelty. With the devastating precision of someone who had spent a lifetime studying the one person they most needed to understand. Franklin felt it land. He felt the exact shape of it, the way it pressed against every place he was softest, and he said nothing. He stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there for what witnesses described as a very long time, and then he turned around. And what he said next was not what William expected. It was not anger. It was not defense. It was not the counterargument of a man fighting to win. It was 4 words. 4 words that ended their relationship for the rest of Franklin's life. 4 words that only make sense when you understand everything that came before them. And those 4 words are the key to the third warning. The warning about infatuation. The warning Franklin said was more dangerous than the other 2 combined. Because what he said in that room did not just end a conversation. It revealed the one thing about Benjamin Franklin that he had spent his entire life trying to keep hidden. From his enemies, from the world, from himself. Pause. And if you leave now, you will never know what it was. He said, I forgive you. Not, you are wrong. Not, you have betrayed me. Not the argument of a father defending his life's work or a statesman defending his cause. Just that. I forgive you. William stared at him. because those words made no sense in the context of the conversation they had just been having. They had been talking about politics, about loyalty, about the crown and the colonies, and where a man plants his flag when the ground beneath him is splitting apart. Forgiveness had nothing to do with any of that. Unless you understood what Franklin was actually saying, he was not forgiving William for choosing the wrong side of the revolution. He was forgiving him for something older than that, something that had been building between them for decades. He was forgiving his son for becoming exactly what an absent, anguished, silently struggling father had shaped him to be. A man who sought certainty in institutions because he had never found it in the man he needed it from most. Franklin was forgiving William. And he was forgiving himself. And in doing so, he stepped into the first of the 3 lessons that his entire life had been building toward. The first lesson is this: your weakness is not the enemy of your strength. Secrecy about your weakness is. Franklin had spent 40 years believing that if he kept his doubts hidden from his family, he was protecting them. What he was actually doing was leaving them alone in a house full of unanswered questions. And people left alone with unanswered questions do not sit quietly and wait. They build answers from whatever materials are available. They use their own fear, their own insecurity, their own need to matter. Franklin wrote toward the end of his life something that very few people have ever stopped to fully absorb. Hide your weakness from your enemies by all means, but understand that your family already knows it exists. What you deny them is not the knowledge of your weakness, but the wisdom of how you carry it. Read that once more. Your family already knows your weakness exists. What you deny them when you hide it is not the fact of it. It is the example of how a person of character walks through difficulty without being destroyed by it. And that example, that daily living demonstration of how to carry hard things with dignity, is the most valuable thing you can give the people you love. Very few people ever realize this. The lesson: do not hide what you carry. Show them how you carry it. The second lesson took Franklin longer to reach. It came after the war, after the reconciliation attempts that mostly failed, after the letters that went unanswered, and the years that passed between him and William, like water through a broken dam. It came when he was alone. And aloneness, real aloneness, has a way of burning away everything that is not essential until you are left with only what is true. What Franklin understood about anguish after everything was this: anguish shared without shape destroys the people who receive it. But anguish shaped into meaning, turned into something that can be understood and learned from, becomes a gift. The most unexpected kind of gift. The kind that changes the people who witness it, not by burdening them, but by showing them that survival is possible. That darkness does not have to be final. Listen to this very carefully. The difference between anguish that damages a family and anguish that strengthens one is not the amount of pain involved. It is whether the person carrying it has found the words for it, has built a frame around it, has been able to say, "This is what happened. This is how it changed me. And this is what I now know, because I walked through it." Franklin wrote, "A painful truth is always better than a hidden lie, even the truth of our own suffering. You have been taught that strength means not needing anyone, that self-sufficiency is the highest form of dignity, that the less you show of your inner life, the more powerful you appear. But consider what that teaching has cost you. Consider the people in your life who love you, and who are living with the weather of your anguish without a map. Consider what it would mean to give them the map, not the full collapse, not the unloading of every weight onto shoulders that are not built for it, but the honest, shaped, framed truth of what you carry and why, and what it has taught you. The lesson: anguish hidden poisons slowly. Anguish shaped into meaning heals the people brave enough to speak it. And now the third lesson, the one about infatuation. The one Franklin called the most dangerous of the 3. Here is something very few people know. Franklin's warning about infatuation was not about desire. It was not about attraction or obsession, or the way a person can become consumed by wanting something they cannot have. Those things are real, but they were not what Franklin meant. He meant something more precise. He meant the infatuation with a version of yourself that your family has not yet seen. The version you become when you are reaching for something new, when you are changing, when the person you are becoming does not yet match the person the people closest to you have agreed to know. This is the most dangerous thing to share inside a family. Not because families are cruel, but because families are conservative in the deepest sense of that word. They conserve. They hold the version of you that they have always known. They love that version. They have built their understanding of themselves partly in relationship to that version. And when you begin to change, when you reach toward something new, their love for the old version can become, without anyone intending it, a cage. Franklin was always becoming, always reaching, always infatuated with the next version of himself that the horizon seemed to promise. And every time he brought that infatuation home before it had solidified into something real, the reaction of the people who loved him most was to pull him back toward the familiar. Not out of malice, out of love, out of the deeply human need to keep what you cherish exactly as you found it. He wrote, "Do not let those who love you most become the reason you become least." That sentence should stop you completely, because you have felt this. You have had an idea, a dream, a new direction, a quiet revolution happening inside you, and you have brought it to your family too early. Before it was strong enough to survive their concern, before it was rooted enough to withstand their doubt. And their love expressed as worry, expressed as caution, expressed as, "Are you sure?" and "What if it doesn't work?" And "You have so much to lose" pressed against that new thing until it folded, and you let it fold. Because you love them, and because part of you agreed with them, and because the infatuation was still young and tender and could not yet defend itself. The lesson: protect what is new inside you until it is strong enough to be seen. Share the dream after you have built it, not before. 3 warnings. 3 lessons. A lifetime of paying the price for learning them too late. But here is the question that Franklin asked himself in his final years. The one that remained after everything else had been resolved, or accepted, or grieved. It is the same question waiting for you right now on the other side of everything you have just heard. And it is the most important question in the entire story. The question Franklin asked himself in his final years was simple. Not easy, but simple. He asked, if I had known then what I know now, what would I have protected and what would I have shared? And the answer, when it finally came to him, was not what he expected. It was not a list. It was not a strategy. It was not a set of rules about what to reveal and what to conceal. It was something quieter than all of that. Something that arrived not as a thought, but as a feeling. The feeling of a man who had lived long enough, and lost enough, and loved enough to finally understand the difference between wisdom and walls. The answer was this. He would have protected his weakness until he understood it well enough to turn it into a lesson. Pause. He would have shaped his anguish into words before letting it fill the rooms where his family slept. Pause. And he would have let his infatuation grow strong enough in private before bringing it into the light of people whose love, however real, could not help but try to hold him still. Pause. 3 warnings. 3 lessons. 1 life that paid the full price of learning them slowly, and now they belong to you. So here is the challenge: not tomorrow, not next week, today. Before you speak to the person closest to you tonight, stop for 1 moment, just 1, and ask yourself which of these 3 things you are carrying right now. Are you carrying a weakness you have been handing to people who love you before you have understood it yourself? Are you filling your home with the weather of an anguish that has no shape, no frame, no words yet? Leaving the people you love to build their own explanations from your silence. Are you bringing a new dream to the table too early, offering it to hands that love you but are not yet equipped to hold something that fragile? You do not have to answer that question out loud. You do not have to share it with anyone tonight. That is exactly the point. Some things need to be understood before they are spoken. Some truths need to be carried alone long enough to become strong. Some parts of you belong to you first, and to the people you love only after you have done the work of understanding what you are actually giving them. Franklin did not learn this young. He learned it the way most people learn the most important things, through loss. Through the slow accumulation of consequences he did not fully understand until they were sitting across a table from him, with his own eyes and his own jaw and his own voice telling him exactly what his silence had cost. You do not have to learn it that way. You are hearing it now, which means you still have time. The wise person does not share everything. The wise person chooses with intention. The wise person understands that love is not measured by how much you reveal, but by how carefully you protect the people you love from the weight of what they cannot yet carry. And here is the question Franklin never fully answered. The one that outlived him. The one that I want to leave with you now. If the people closest to you have already been shaped by what you have shared, whether it was your weakness or your anguish or your unfinished dreams, is it too late to change what they have built from it? Or is that the real work that remains? If this story moved something in you today, do one thing right now. Hit the like button. Not for the algorithm, for the reminder. Every time you see this video again, it will ask you the same question Franklin asked himself at the end of his life. And that question is worth being asked more than once. Subscribe to this channel. Because the people who need these stories are not always the ones who are suffering loudly. Sometimes, they are the ones who are sitting quietly carrying everything alone, waiting for someone to hand them the words for what they have never been able to name. And leave a comment below. Tell me which of the 3 lessons landed hardest for you today. Was it the warning about weakness, the warning about anguish, or the warning about infatuation and the dreams you brought to the table before they were strong enough to survive being seen? Tell me. Because your answer will help someone else who is reading these comments at midnight, carrying something they do not yet have words for, wondering if they are the only one. You are not the only one. Benjamin Franklin was not the only one either. And the fact that he left these warnings behind, carved out of his own losses across letters and journal entries, and a lifetime of getting it wrong before he got it right, means that his greatest gift was not the lightning rod, or the bifocals, or the Constitution. His greatest gift was this: the courage to say, I learned this the hard way, so that you do not have to.